This training will focus on the 2021-2022 SC5000 Title I Part A Campus Selection Schedule and the Title I Part A Within-LEA Allocations as presented by the Grants Administration Division and Federal Program Compliance Division.
Welcome to the ESSA Consolidated Federal Grant Application SC5000 portion of today's training. Hello, my name is Lori Marquardt, and I am one of the negotiation team leads in the Grants Administration Division. My colleague Nellie Nino is also a negotiation team lead in Grants Administration Division. We will be going over how to complete the SC5000 in detail. The SC5000 Title I Part A Campus Selection Schedule is required if Title I Part A funds are budgeted on Schedule BS 6001 Program Budget Summary in the ESSA Consolidated Federal Grant Application. We will first take a look at the general information found in the schedule header. The LEA information is pre-populated with no input required. At the top of the schedule, you can also locate and click on the View Print Report feature. When you click on the View Print Report feature, a report will generate that includes the information you entered into the SC5000. Section A of the SC5000 includes LEA-specific data. The header row includes the LEA County District number and LEA name that is pre-populated with no input required. The LEA name in row 1 is pre-populated with no input required. For row 2, type the LEA total low income percentage by calculating the total number residing in the entire LEA that met low income criteria and dividing the total by the total number residing. An alternate method is to substitute enrollment for the total number residing. The LEA total enrollment in row 3 is a new row that was added for 21-22. The LEA total enrollment is pre-populated with no input required. This number will be automatically calculated based on the sum of the campus enrollment numbers entered by the LEA in Part B. Section B of the SC5000 is the section where the LEA will enter the campus-specific data. In the top right-hand corner above Section B is the Copy Prior Year Data feature button. Selecting the Copy Prior Year Data button populates the SC5000 with data from the latest valid submission of your LEA's prior year ESSA Consolidated Federal Grant Application. Only the following data will be populated: basis of eligibility, campus status, consolidated funds. Please note that if you selected EdFlex, one-year transition, or school-wide previous year in 2021, the data will not copy due to the selections being removed from the basis of eligibility column and added to a new column of the schedule that we will address later in the presentation. Please be cautious about the following when using the Copy Prior Year Data feature. Copying prior year data will override any data that you have manually entered into Section B. If you choose to copy prior year data, select the button before you manually enter any data. Prior year data may only be copied into Section B on the original submission of the application. The 3-digit campus number, name, and grade span of the LEA's campuses are pre-populated from information in AskTED, which is updated in late May. Districts, ISDs, are responsible for maintaining accurate campus information in AskTED. Charter schools may contact the Charter School Administration Division to make any changes to AskTED. In the Total Campus Enrollment column, type the total campus enrollment. This is the actual enrollment on the campus and not the residing numbers. For each campus, select the basis of eligibility from the drop-down list to reflect how the eligibility determination was made. Please note that some of the items in this column have been removed and added to the new additional eligibility column. The 2021 Basis of Eligibility drop-down list options can be seen on the screen. For 21-22, 3 of the items have been removed from the drop-down and added to another column. This change was necessary in order to be able to capture eligibility criteria that may require an LEA to make multiple selections. In the Basis of Eligibility column, 1 selection is required per campus. For specific information and definitions for each of the options, please see the SC5000 Schedule Instructions and the SC5000 Guidance Handbook. The additional eligibility column was added to the schedule for 21-22. The list of checkbox options were taken from the Basis of Eligibility column drop-down list previously shared. For each campus, select the additional eligibility checkbox or checkboxes to reflect additional eligibility options the campus is using to establish eligibility. 2 of the items that were removed from the Basis of Eligibility drop-down list we looked at earlier have been added to this column: School-wide Program Previous Year and 1-Year Transition. EdFlex was broken down into 2 additional eligibility options: EdFlex Individual Programmatic Waiver and School-wide Program Eligibility EdFlex Waiver. For specific information and definitions for each of the options, please see the SC5000 Schedule Instructions and the SC5000 Guidance Handbook. The Campus Low Income Percentage column is required to be entered for each campus. And now I will hand off the presentation to my colleague Nellie Nino.
If you selected residing in the Basis of Eligibility column, you calculate the percentage using the residing numbers. If you selected enrollment in the Basis of Eligibility column, then you calculate this percentage using the enrollment number. To calculate the campus low income percentage, divide the number of low income students by the figure entered in the total campus enrollment field and enter that result in this column. The campus status column is a drop-down listing. From the drop-down list, select the option that indicates how the LEA will serve each campus based on eligibility requirements. The campus status drop-down list options include school-wide program, targeted assistance program, not served, or skipped. For specific information and definitions for each of the options, please see the SC5000 Schedule Instructions and the SC5000 Guidance Handbook. The number of students served on a targeted assistance campus column is to be completed only for campuses the LEA chooses to serve as targeted assistance campuses. If the campus is implementing a targeted assistance program, enter the number of students who meet the multiple, educationally related, objective criteria that the LEA and the campus have established to determine which students at that campus are most in need of services under Title I, Part A. The other column allows you to type text. This column is for the LEA to explain any other special circumstances that may apply to a campus if applicable. For example, if you selected school-wide program previous year in the additional eligibility column, you must list the year and percentage the campus established school-wide eligibility in this other column. The Consolidated Funds column is a drop-down list. Complete this column only if the campus's Title I Part A campus status is school-wide program. Select from the drop-down list to indicate whether and how the LEA intends to consolidate funds. The drop-down list options include Title I Part A only, federal funds only, or federal, state, and local. For specific information and definitions for each of the options, please see the SC5000 Schedule Instructions and the SC5000 Guidance Handbook. The final section of the SC5000 is Section C. If at least one campus has been designated as school-wide SW, Targeted Assistance TA, or SCIP, the LEA must check the appropriate checkbox to complete the schedule. By selecting this assurance checkbox, the LEA is assuring that they have complied with the federal requirements for this designation for each campus being served or skipped. By selecting school-wide program for one or more campuses, the LEA is assuring that the campus planned for up to a year to be school-wide, and the elements of a school-wide program are included in their school-wide and/or campus improvement plan. By selecting targeted assistance for one or more campuses, the LEA is assuring each of the following. The LEA includes in the district improvement plan multiple educationally related objective criteria to identify students in greatest need, and the LEA can only serve students identified as being in greatest need, not all students in a grade. By selecting SCIP for one or more campuses, the LEA is assuring all of the following. Each skipped campus meets the comparability of services requirement. Each skipped campus receives supplemental funds from other state or local sources that are expended according to the requirements of a targeted assistance or school-wide campus. The funds expended from such other sources equal or exceeded the amount that would be provided to the campus under Title I, Part A. There are several resources that an LEA can use to become more familiar with the SC5000 schedule. The first resource is the Schedule SC5000 Guidance Document. This document can be found in the Application and Support Information section of the ESSA Consolidated Federal Grant Application Grants page on the TEA Grant Opportunities webpage. The second resource is the schedule instructions for the SC5000. The instructions can be accessed from the eGrants application system. When you open the SC5000 in eGrants, the instructions button can be found in the top right-hand corner. If you click on that button, the instructions document will open.
If you have questions regarding how to complete the SC5000 schedule, here is a list of grant negotiators by region. We also have a list of contacts for the expenditure reporting system. Thank you.
This concludes the portion of the training for the SC5000. Jaime Huerta, in the Federal Program Compliance Division, will now provide the program-specific information as it relates to Within-LEA Title I Part A campus allocations.
Thank you for joining us for the Title I Part A Within-LEA Allocations training presented by the Federal Program Compliance Division at the Texas Education Agency. My name is Jaime Huerta, and I am the Title I Part A Program Director at the Texas Education Agency. If you have any questions or need additional information after the training, please reach out via telephone or email. You can also send your questions to our division email address. Today's training is an overview of the Title I Part A Within-LEA Allocations process. This process can be very complex due to all of the options available to LEAs in determining Title I Part A eligibility for campuses. It will be normal for you to feel like this at times. However, stay with me through the training and let's go ahead and get started. In today's training, participants will gain a better understanding of the factors determining the amount allocated to Title I Part A campuses, the steps used to determine Within-LEA Title I Part A allocations, and the exceptions associated with allocating Title I Part A funds to campuses. At the Texas Education Agency, Everything we do is through the lens of the strategic priorities and enablers. We believe that it is our responsibility to ensure that every child is prepared for success in college, a career, or the military. We look to accomplish this through our strategic priorities, which are to recruit, support, and retain teachers and principals, build a foundation of reading and math, connect high school to career and college, and improve low-performing schools. Our enablers are to increase transparency, fairness, and rigor in district and campus academic and financial performance, ensure compliance, effectively implement legislation and inform policymakers, and strengthen organizational foundations. To achieve our vision, we must all work together to make these strategic priorities our roadmap, and specifically in finding innovative ways to support our students in an equitable manner. We must all view compliance through the equity lens to ensure that our most vulnerable populations are receiving the support they need. Before we get started with the training, I wanted to advise you of the Training Companion Guide that the statewide ESSA Title I Part A Capacity Building Initiative at Education Service Center Region 20 has developed to accompany this training. It can be accessed from the initiative's webpage address noted on the screen or on the Statewide Training Series website. This training was developed based on a draft document released for public comment by the U.S. Department of Education in March 2020. The document they released combines existing information on within-district Title I Part A allocations that currently exists in multiple places to make the information easier for states and LEAs to access and use. I have uploaded this document into the handout section so that you can also take a look at it. We will begin our training by taking a look at two main factors that determine the amount of Title I Part A funds that an LEA has available to allocate to campuses. The first factor is the size of the LEA's total Title I allocation, which includes the LEA's Title I Part A entitlement and any transfers into Title I Part A from Title II Part A and Title IV Part A under funding transferability only. Please note that LEAs transferring funds under the Rural Education Achievement Program, also known as REAP, do not have to take the transferred funds into consideration when determining campus allocations. REAP funds do not appear on the ESSA Consolidated Application Title I Part A program schedule, referred to as the PS 3101, and are not included in the total amount available. The second factor, which will be discussed further, is the amount of funds the LEA reserves for required and authorized activities. Let's take a detailed look at the second factor, LEA Title I Part A reservations. There are two types of LEA reservations. An LEA is required to make certain reservations or set-asides at the LEA level. These reservations are noted in statute as musts. The other types of reservations are authorized reservations or set-asides that an LEA may, at their discretion, reserve funds at the LEA level for such authorized activities. The ESSA statute requires LEAs to reserve funds for three purposes, which include the Equitable Services for Private School Children Reservation, Parent and Family Engagement Reservation, and Homeless Children and Youth and Children in Local Institutions for Neglected Children Reservations. An LEA that receives Title I funds must reserve a proportional share of those funds to provide equitable services to eligible children who attend a private school. ESSA statute requires an LEA to determine the proportional share of Title I funds available for providing and administering equitable services based on the LEA's total Title I allocation prior to any expenditures or transfers of funds. This means that an LEA applies the proportion used to calculate the proportional share to its entire Title I allocation, including any Title II Part A or Title IV Part A funds that an LEA transfers into Title I Part A prior to the other required and authorized reservations discussed later. From the proportional share for equitable services, the LEA must reserve at least 1% if the LEA's total Title I allocation exceeds $500,000 to provide engagement activities for parents and families of participating private school children. Section 1116 of the ESSA statute requires an LEA with a total Title I allocation that exceeds $500,000 to reserve at least 1% of its total Title I allocation to carry out statutorily required parent and family engagement activities. This amount includes the proportion required to provide equitable services to parents and families of participating private school children. Of the amount remaining after determining equitable services for parents and families of private school children, the LEA must distribute at least 90% to its Title I schools, giving priority to high-need schools. An LEA with a Title I allocation of $500,000 or less may, but is not required, to reserve Title I funds for parent and family engagement, although its Title I schools must carry out parent and family engagement activities under Section 1116, regardless of any reservation. ESSA also requires an LEA to reserve Title I Part A funds to provide services comparable to those provided to children in Title I Part A schools, to homeless children and youth in Title I and non-Title I schools, which may be determined based on a needs assessment, and to children in local institutions for neglected children. Similar to how it calculates a proportional share for equitable services, an LEA must determine the amount of these reservations based on its total Title I Part A allocation prior to any allowable expenditures or transfers of funds. In addition to the required Title I Part A reservations we just discussed, an LEA at its discretion may reserve funds for the following authorized activities: services to students in local institutions for delinquent children and neglected or delinquent children in community day programs, administration of Title I programs for public school children, which includes administration of the Title I Part A program at the LEA level, administration of Title I Part A programs for eligible private school students, and programs for students at facilities for neglected and delinquent. And the LEA may also reserve funds at the LEA level for other authorized activities, such as early childhood education for eligible children, school improvement, and coordinated services. To ensure proper use of Title I Part A funds that are reserved at the LEA level, I wanted to go over allowable and unallowable uses of Title I Part A funds as it relates to funds reserved at the LEA level. Title I Part A funds can only be used to support Title I Part A students at Title I Part A served campuses, with only one exception. Title I Part A funds can only be used for campuses that are operating a school-wide program or targeted assistance program. The only exception is related to the LEA reservation for services to homeless students. The ESSA statute allows for Title I Part A funds reserved by the LEA for services to homeless students to be used to support homeless students on all campuses, regardless of their Title I status. As for unallowable use of Title I Part A LEA reserve funds, if an LEA skips a campus, although they are eligible to receive Title I Part A funds, LEA reserved funds cannot be used for skipped campuses. If a campus meets Title I Part A eligibility requirements, but the LEA chooses not to serve students on that campus, an LEA cannot use their reserve funds on that campus. If a campus, based on their campus low-income percentage, does not meet Title I Part A eligibility requirements to operate a school-wide program or a targeted assistance program, they are not considered a Title I Part A campus, and thus students on the campus cannot be served by Title I Part A funds. The following example will illustrate how, for an LEA with a total Title I allocation of $5 million, making the required and authorized reservations discussed earlier, results in the amount available to allocate to public schools. The LEA entitlement was $4 million, and the LEA transferred in $750,000 from Title II Part A and $250,000 from Title IV Part A, making the total Title I Part A allocation $5 million. As we take a look at this example and the steps for reserving funds, we will use a table to help us understand the LEA reservations process. The table will be organized as shown, with the step, the reservations activity, the basis for the reservation, the amount of the reservation, and the amount of allocation remaining after the reservation. We will use a 5-step process to assist us with understanding the LEA reservation process. The first step will be to determine the amount of Title I Part A funds that the LEA must reserve for equitable services to eligible private school students. In this example, 10% of children from low-income families who reside in the LEA's Title I public school attendance areas attend private schools, which is a proportional share. Therefore, in Step 1 of the LEA reservation process, which is to reserve funds for private school equitable services, the LEA must allocate 10% of its total allocation for equitable services, which would be $500,000. Keep in mind that this amount includes the amount required for parent and family engagement for families of participating private school students, which would be $5,000, which is 1% of $500,000. After the equitable services and administration of equitable services reservation, the LEA has $4.5 million left. Now that we have examined Step 1, now let's take a look at Step 2, which includes the LEA reservation for parent and family engagement activities. In Step 2 of the LEA reservation process, which is to reserve funds for parent and family engagement activities, since the LEA's total Title I allocation exceeds $500,000, the LEA must allocate at least 1% of its total allocation for parent and family engagement activities, which is $50,000. However, keep in mind that in Step 1, the LEA already reserved $5,000 for parent and family engagement for families of participating private school students. The LEA can subtract the $5,000 from the $50,000 and reserve only $45,000 for public school parent and family engagement. Now, after the equitable services and administration of equitable services reservation, the LEA had $4.5 million left to allocate to its campuses. Now, after the parent and family engagement activities, the LEA has $4,455,000 left to allocate to its Title I Part A eligible campuses. Now that we have completed Steps 1 and 2, let's take a look at Step 3, which includes the LEA reservation for homeless children and youth and for children in local institutions for neglected children. We will look at 2 separate reservations for Step 3. For Step 3A, which will be for homeless children and youth based on the LEA's needs assessment and their Title I allocation, the LEA has decided to reserve $525,000. After this reservation, the LEA now has $3,930,000 left of their allocation. For Step 3B, which will be for children in local institutions for neglected children, based on the LEA's needs assessment and their Title I allocation, the LEA has decided to reserve $325,000. After this reservation, the LEA now has $3,605,000 left of their allocation to allocate to Title I Part A campuses. Now that we have completed steps 1, 2, and 3, let's now take a look at step 4, which includes the LEA reservation for other authorized reservations, which are reservations that the LEA may reserve at their discretion. In this example, we will look at two separate reservations for Step 4. The LEA chose to reserve funds for preschool programs and administration of Title I programs. For Step 4A, which will be for preschool programs, based on statute and regulations, the LEA has decided to reserve $200,000. After this reservation, the LEA now has $3,405,000 left to allocate to its Title I Part A campuses. For Step 4B, which will be for administration of Title I Part A programs, the LEA has decided to reserve $405,000. After this reservation, the LEA now has $3 million left of their allocation that they can now allocate to their Title I Part A eligible campuses. Now that we have completed steps 1, 2, 3, and 4, let's take a look at the final step, which is ultimately the amount available in the LEA's Title I Part A allocation that can be allocated to the Title I Part A eligible campuses. In Step 5, the LEA must allocate its remaining funds, which are $3 million, to eligible public schools. This table shows a composite look at all the steps the LEA in this example followed to determine their amount available to allocate to Title I Part A eligible schools. Please note that in the example provided, the total LEA reservation exceeds 30% of the entitlement. If the total reservation exceeds 30% of the entitlement, TEA will contact you for a justification. Now we will take a look at the steps for determining Within-LEA allocations after reservations have been determined. We will follow a three-step process with the ultimate goal of allocating funds to eligible Title I Part A campuses. Step 1 is determining poverty counts. Step 2 is ranking and identifying eligible campuses. And Step 3 is allocating funds to eligible campuses. Let's take a look at Step 1, determining poverty counts. ESSA statute requires an LEA with at least 1,000 enrolled students to rank all of its school attendance areas according to their percentage of public school students residing in the attendance area from low-income families. ESSA statute also permits an LEA to rank its campuses according to their percentage of public school students from low-income families that are enrolled in the schools. An LEA must use the same measure of poverty to identify eligible school attendance areas in schools, rank areas in schools, and determine the allocation for each area and school. It is important to note that an LEA with an enrollment of fewer than 1,000 students are exempt in statute from having to use the poverty measures to determine which of its schools receive Title I funds. Such an LEA may use other criteria, such as academic performance or the grade span of its schools, to determine which of its schools receive Title I funds, or it may choose to allocate Title I funds to all of its schools. Additionally, it is important to note that the previous guidance we shared included language that this exemption applied to single attendance areas as well. That is incorrect. Statute only references this exemption as being only available to LEAs with less than 1,000 students. To determine the number of public school students from low-income families, the ESSA statute provides an LEA the option to use the number of public school children eligible for free or reduced price lunch under the Richard B. Russell National School Lunch Act, including children counted through the Community Eligibility Provision Program, in families receiving assistance under the state program funded under Title IV Part A of the Social Security Act, otherwise known as Temporary Assistance for Needy Families, eligible to receive medical assistance under the Medicaid program, ages 5 to 17 in poverty as counted in the most recent LEA level census poverty data approved by the department, or counted by the LEA using a composite of any of the above measures. If an LEA chooses to use ages 5 through 17 in poverty data, be advised that because census data are generally not available at the school level, if an LEA uses this measure, it would most likely be part of a composite with one or more of the additional measures that are noted here. For the year of data used to determine poverty counts of public schools, an LEA uses the most recently available data, which will be from the previous school year in most cases. For example, with respect to the Title I school allocations for the 2020-2021 school year, an LEA that uses free and reduced price lunch data will generally use data collected during the 2019-2020 school year. Due to the COVID-19 pandemic, the U.S. Department of Agriculture's Food and Nutrition Service granted nationwide USDA waivers of the collection of free and reduced price lunch applications through June 30th of 2021 to support access to nutritious meals while minimizing potential exposure to COVID-19. Thus, the data LEAs may have for the 2020-2021 school year may not be available. Based on this, the USDE released a fact sheet with some flexibility as it relates to the year of data for the 2021-2022 school year. The fact sheet was released by the U.S. Department of Education on January 4th, 2021. We will now take a look at the flexibility being offered as it relates to options for an LEA for school year 2021-2022. To the extent that the National School Lunch Program, otherwise referred to as NSLP data from school year 2020-2021 are not available, options available to an LEA for its Within-LEA allocations in school year 21-22 include using Medicaid program data from school year 2021, temporary assistance for needy families data from school year 2021, the best available NSLP data, which may be from school year 2019-2020, NSLP data from school year 2021 that may be accessible, example given counts of children identified through direct certification, or a composite of NSLP, Medicaid, and TANF data, which might include Medicaid or TANF counts from school year 2020-2021, and best available free and reduced price lunch data, which may be from school year 2019-2020. Or the LEA can also use data from a poverty survey conducted by the SEA or LEA that replicate NSLP, Medicaid, or TANF data. Now that we have completed step 1, which is determining poverty counts, we can now move on to step 2, which is ranking and identifying eligible campuses. In step 2, please note that the low-income percentages that will be referenced and the options for serving campuses are for determining overall Title I Part A eligibility. An LEA must first determine overall Title I Part A eligibility before determining which program a campus will implement. Towards the end of the training, information will be provided as it relates to the 2 Title I Part A programs campuses can implement after the LEA has determined that they are eligible to receive Title I Part A funds. The 2 programs are a school-wide program and a targeted assistance program. Each program has its own eligibility requirements that will be shared later in the training. Step 2 is broken down into 4 steps. These steps include how to rank campuses in order of poverty without regard to the grade span they serve, identification of eligible campuses as per the 75% rule, option for certain high schools that are going to be served between 50% and 75% poverty, and options for serving the remaining campuses. In step 2, the LEA begins a process of ranking and identifying eligible campuses by ranking campuses in order of poverty without regard to the grade span they serve. In this example, the LEA included the schools listed by letter of the alphabet, grades served, student enrollment, number of students eligible for free and reduced price lunch, which is the poverty measure selected by the LEA, and poverty percentage. The LEA sorted this listing by poverty percentage, ranking the campus with the highest poverty percentage at the top and the campus with the lowest poverty percentage towards the bottom. After an LEA has ranked all of its schools by percentage of poverty, the ESSA statute requires the LEA to first allocate, in rank order of poverty, Title I funds to the schools above 75% poverty, including any middle schools or high schools. Thus, before an LEA can decide how to determine eligibility for any school with a poverty percentage that does not exceed 75%, it must allocate Title I funds to all its schools above 75%. In this example, the LEA would identify the campus or campuses above 75%. Since Public School A is the only campus above 75% poverty, it is the first campus that is to be allocated Title I Part A funds. After an LEA has ranked all of its campuses by percentage of poverty and identified campuses with a poverty percent above 75%, if funds remain, an LEA may choose to serve high schools with a poverty percentage between 50% and 75% in rank order of poverty. The implementation of this option occurs before serving any other grade span. After an LEA has ranked all of its campuses by percentage of poverty, identified campuses with a poverty percent above 75%, and has determined if high schools above 50% poverty will be served, if funds remain, the LEA has several other options for serving the remaining campuses. After an LEA has served all of its campuses with a poverty rate above 75%, if funds remain, the LEA may serve lower-ranked eligible campuses as per several other options. These options include the LEA poverty percentage, serving a campus above 35% poverty, grade span grouping, one-year transition, feeder pattern, EdFlex individual programmatic waiver, the optional method, and direct certification. The first 2 options we will take a look at are the LEA poverty percentage and 35% or greater poverty options. A school is eligible for Title I funds if its poverty percentage is as high as the LEA's poverty percentage, or at the LEA's discretion, at least 35%. For example, if an LEA's poverty percentage is 30%, any school in the LEA that has a poverty percentage of at least 30% is eligible. In contrast, for an LEA with a poverty percentage of 35% or greater, the campuses that are eligible for Title I are those with a poverty percentage that equals or exceeds the LEA's poverty percentage, unless the LEA chooses to make eligible all campuses with a poverty percentage of 35% or more. As we will discuss later when we take a look at allocating funds to eligible campuses, meeting the eligibility criteria does not guarantee that a school will receive Title I funds from its LEA. Receipt of funds depends on the amount of an LEA's allocation and school poverty rankings, the per pupil amount the LEA allocates to each school, and in some cases, the grades that a school serves. We will discuss serving campuses with a poverty percentage below 35% later, which will require the LEA to utilize the 125% rule. Let's look at an example related to the LEA's poverty percentage. Based on a previous example, we had already examined or determined that School A met the eligibility criteria since it was above the 75% threshold. Based on the data in this table, the LEA's poverty percent is 34%. Thus, campuses G, C, D, O, B, F, I, E, and H are eligible because their poverty percentage is as high as the LEA's poverty percentage. Now let's look at an example where the LEA's poverty percentage is 35% or greater. Based on a previous example, we had already determined that School A met eligibility criteria since it was above the 75% poverty threshold. Based on the data in this table, the LEA's poverty percentage is 36.2%. Campuses G, C, D, O, B, F, Q, I, and E are eligible because their poverty percentage is at least 35%. Please note that even though campuses I and E are below the LEA's poverty percentage of 36.2%, they are eligible because they are above 35%. Now let's take a look at the grade span grouping option. In addition to the district-wide ranking method we looked at earlier, an LEA may determine eligibility within grade spans and choose which grade spans to serve. In doing so, the LEA may use its district-wide poverty percentage or the percentage of poverty data of the relevant grade spans. If a grade span poverty percentage is above 35%, the LEA may also identify as eligible any school with a poverty percentage of at least 35%. The following examples will show how an LEA determines eligibility on a grade span basis for its campuses with a poverty percentage of 75% or below that are in a grade span with more than one school. If there is only one school in a grade span, that school is eligible for Title I funds, provided that any school above 75% poverty has received a Title I allocation. This example shows School Q as the only school in a grade span, which is a high school. School Q is eligible for Title I funds because its poverty percentage is above 35%, and because it is the only school in the high school grade span. Please note that if there is only one school in a grade span, that school is eligible for Title I funds, provided that any school above 75% poverty has received a Title I allocation. In this example, the LEA grouped all the elementary campuses together in one grade span. Campuses G, C, D, B, F, I, E, and H are eligible because their poverty percentage is at least as high as a grade span's poverty percentage of 32.8%. The other campuses are ineligible because their poverty percentage is lower than the grade span poverty percentage of 32.8%. In this example, the LEA grouped all the middle schools together in one grade span. School O is eligible because its poverty percentage exceeds the grade span's poverty percentage of 33.9%. In contrast, campuses N and P are ineligible because the poverty percentage of each school is lower than the grade span poverty percentage of 33.9%. We will now further examine the one-year transition option. The one-year transition option allows a campus that was Title I served in the previous year but is no longer Title I eligible to be eligible for a Title I Part A campus allocation. This option may only be used in the year directly following Title I eligibility. This provision applies to a newly ineligible school and not to an eligible school that has fallen in the poverty ranking compared to the previous year's ranking and does not receive a Title I allocation from its LEA because the LEA allocates its Title I funds to other eligible campuses with higher poverty percentages. We will now look at the feeder pattern option. This option can be used to establish a middle or high school campus's Title I Part A eligibility by projection, based on the number of low-income students in the elementary school attendance areas that feed into that campus. The LEA must maintain the following documentation for any campus whose eligibility is established via feeder pattern: low-income numbers and enrollment from those campuses that comprise the feeder pattern for the campus in question. It is important to note that before an LEA may use feeder patterns to determine the poverty percentage of secondary schools, the LEA must conduct outreach to its secondary schools to inform them of the option, and a majority of its secondary schools must approve the use of feeder patterns. A secondary school would be defined as a middle school and high school. The next option for serving remaining campuses is the EdFlex individual programmatic waiver option. This option can be used to establish Title I Part A eligibility for a campus that does not meet the low-income criteria to be a Title I campus at all. Please note that utilizing this option involves multiple steps. There is additional action required by the LEA for selecting this option. The LEA would need to apply for and receive an EdFlex individual programmatic waiver in order to qualify as a Title I campus. This is a separate waiver process that involves review by the state's EdFlex committee and approval by the Commissioner of Education at the Texas Education Agency. It is also important to note that TEA may only consider an LEA's request to waive the Title I Part A campus eligibility requirements if the low-income percentage for the campus in question is within 10 percentage points of the lowest served campus that does meet the statutory eligibility requirements. The waiver application process needs to be started early, as there are several steps before the waiver application can be considered for approval. The process includes completing the waiver application, soliciting public comment, determining evaluation criteria based on the evaluation requirements, site-based decision-making committee review and approval, campus principal approval, superintendent approval, Board of Trustees approval, submission to TEA, TEA EdFlex Committee review, and ultimately TEA Commissioner of Education review and approval. The optional method is another way in which a campus may establish Title I Part A eligibility. For a campus that is unable to establish Title I Part A eligibility using the number of students residing in its attendance area, the optional method may be selected if the percentage of enrolled low-income students is equal to or greater than the low-income percentage of a participating campus. The final option we will take a look at is the direct certification option. This option may be used if an LEA is using Community Eligibility Provision or Department of Agriculture reported numbers and percentages. Identified students are eligible through the Richard B. Russell National School Lunch Act. This option is selected only when the LEA is solely using direct certification data as a poverty measure. Keep in mind that the number of students directly certified is a subset of the total number of students eligible for free and reduced priced meals. Thus, if an LEA has non-CEP campuses with a poverty count based on the number of students approved for free and reduced price meals, and CEP campuses with a poverty count based on, for example, students directly certified using SNAP data, the LEA must use a common poverty metric to rank order its campuses and allocate Title I funds on an equitable basis. This would require the use of a direct certification multiplier. This concludes step 2 of the Within-LEA Allocations process, which is ranking and identifying eligible campuses. In this step, we learned how to rank schools in order of poverty without regard to the grade span they serve. We learned about identification of eligible schools as per the 75% rule. We learned about options for certain high schools that have a poverty percentage between 50% and 75%, and additional options for serving remaining campuses. Now that we've completed steps 1 and 2, we now get to step 3, allocating funds to eligible campuses. Before we begin to examine the allocation of funds to eligible campuses, let's gain a better understanding of some of the phrases I will be referring to in this section of the training. I will be referencing per pupil amount. The per pupil amount is the amount of funds per low-income student that an LEA will allocate to a campus. Campus allocation will also be referenced. The LEA determines the amount it will allocate to a campus, and the amount is referred to as the campus allocation. The campus allocation is determined by the number of low-income students multiplied by the per pupil amount the LEA chooses as per the requirements I will reference in this section of the training. For example, if the per pupil amount that is determined by the LEA for the campus is $1,500, and the campus has a total of 250 students, and 78% of the students come from low-income families, the number of low-income students would be 195. The LEA would determine the campus's allocation by multiplying 195 by 1,500. The campus allocation would be 292,500. We will now take a look at 3 different ways that an LEA may determine campus allocations. We will look at determining campus allocations on an LEA-wide basis, by grade span, and when the 125% rule must be applied. Each description will be followed by an example. ESSA requires an LEA to allocate Title I Part A funds to campuses identified as eligible and selected to participate in rank order based on the total number of public school children from low-income families in each school. An LEA is not required to allocate the same per pupil amount to each participating school. If an LEA allocates different per pupil amounts to participating campuses, the LEA must allocate a per pupil amount that is equal to or higher to campuses with higher poverty rates than it allocates to campuses with lower poverty rates. In this example, we will be taking a look at determining allocations on an LEA-wide basis. The information in the table will contain the following information. Column 1 will include the campuses listed by a letter of the alphabet. Column 2 will include the grades served. Column 3 will include the enrollment for each of the campuses. Column 4 will include the number of students eligible for free and reduced price lunches for each of the campuses, which is the measure of poverty that this LEA chose to utilize. Column 5 will include the poverty percentage for each of the campuses. Column 6 will include the per pupil allocation as determined by the LEA for each campus. And column 7 will include the campus's Title I Part A allocation for each campus, which is derived from multiplying column 4 and column 6. Let's now take a look at the data per campus. Let's take a look at column 5, poverty percentage. Let's determine which campuses meet the Title I Part A eligibility requirements. The LEA low-income percentage in this example is 36.2. Let's now take a look at the rest of the data in this table. In this example, the LEA chooses to allocate Title I funds to every eligible campus except campuses I and E, which are the two eligible campuses with the lowest poverty percentages. As per columns 5 and 6, the LEA ensures that a higher poverty school receives a per pupil allocation that is at least as high as a per pupil allocation of lower poverty campuses. Finally, the LEA does not allocate Title I funds to any school with a poverty percentage below 35%. Therefore, the LEA has flexibility to establish a per pupil allocation without regard to the 125% rule that we will cover later. In contrast to determining allocations on an LEA-wide basis, an LEA can choose to determine allocations within grade spans. Grade span groupings for campus allocations do not have to match the grade spans typical for any grade span category. For example, elementary campuses don't all have to be pre-K through 5th. Middle school campuses don't all have to be 6th through 8th, and high school campuses don't all have to be 9th through 12th. There may be various groupings of grade spans within the same grade span category, as seen in this example. When determining campus allocations using the grade span grouping method, the LEA must ensure that it allocates Title I Part A funds to its campuses with a poverty percentage above 75% first. If the LEA has funds remaining, the LEA has the discretion to allocate the remaining funds by grade span. An LEA that opts to serve high schools between 50 and 75% poverty and other campuses 75% poverty and below using grade span groupings may determine different per pupil amounts for different grade levels, so long as those amounts do not exceed the amount allocated to any school above 75% poverty. When determining campus allocations using the grade span grouping method, the LEA also has the flexibility not to serve a particular grade span. However, if a campus within the grade span has a poverty percentage above 75%, then it must be served as per the previous example. Per pupil amounts within grade spans may also vary so long as the LEA allocates higher per pupil amounts to campuses with higher poverty rates than it allocates to campuses with lower poverty rates. Notice that the per pupil amounts are still below the amount allocated to the campus with the poverty percentage above 75%. Keep in mind that when an LEA allocates Title I funds by grade span, the rule that the LEA must allocate a higher per pupil amount to campuses with higher poverty rates than it allocates to campuses with lower poverty rates would apply within each grade span and not across grade spans. That is the reason that in this example, a high school campus with a lower poverty rate than an elementary campus can be allocated a higher per pupil amount. Let's take a look at a more detailed example of determining allocations within grade spans. As I mentioned earlier, the LEA must serve campuses above 75% poverty, regardless of grade span, and before serving any campus at 75% poverty or below. Based on the data in this table, the LEA ensures that it's allocating Title I funds to its one school with a poverty percentage above 75%. After doing so, the LEA has funds remaining and therefore the discretion to allocate the remaining funds by grade span, which includes the flexibility not to serve a grade span. In this example, we will see that the LEA chooses to serve its elementary and high school grade spans only. In the elementary grade span, the LEA allocates Title I funds in rank order of poverty to 4 campuses only. Although there are 8 campuses eligible, the LEA has chosen to only serve the 4 elementary campuses with the highest poverty percentage in the elementary grade span. In the high school grade span for this LEA, the LEA allocates Title I funds to its one high school. The LEA declines to allocate any Title I funds to its middle schools, even though there is one school eligible to receive funds. In summary, consistent with federal law, the LEA ensures that its school above 75% poverty receives a per pupil allocation that is at least as high as the per pupil allocations of all its other campuses to be served. In addition, the LEA uses its flexibility to allocate a higher per pupil amount to its high school with a 36.2% poverty rate than it allocates to the elementary campuses with a poverty percentage of 75% and below. This is allowable, again, because when an LEA allocates Title I funds by grade span, the rule that the LEA must allocate a higher per pupil amount to campuses with higher poverty rates than it allocates to campuses with lower poverty rates would apply within each grade span and not across grade spans. Now let's take a look at the circumstances in which an LEA would be required to apply the 125% rule. As mentioned previously, an LEA has discretion to establish a per pupil amount for each Title I Part A eligible campus, and that amount need not be the same per pupil amount. However, If an LEA has an LEA-wide low-income percentage below 35%, the LEA may choose to serve campuses either district-wide or by grade span in rank order of poverty down to the LEA low-income percentage. If the LEA chooses to serve any campus below 35% low income, the 125% rule comes into effect. The 125% rule requires an LEA to allocate an amount for each low-income child in each participating Title I school that is at least 125% of the LEA's allocation per low-income child. Determining the LEA's allocation per low-income child is a two-step process. An LEA's allocation per low-income child is the LEA's total Title I allocation before any reservations divided by the number of public school and private school low-income children in the LEA as determined using the poverty measures selected by the LEA. The LEA then multiplies this per pupil amount by 1.25 to determine the minimum amount per low-income child. In this example, the LEA's total Title I allocation before any reservations is $2.5 million, and the total number of public school and private school low-income children in the LEA is 1,243. Thus, for step 1, we calculate 2.5 million divided by 1,243, which gives us 2,011.26. That is the LEA's allocation per low-income child. However, we must now complete step 2 of the calculation to determine what is 125% of the LEA's allocation per low-income child, which would be 2,011.26 cents multiplied by 1.25, which equals $2,514.08. Therefore, the 125% rule requires the LEA to allocate at least $2,514.08 per pupil to each school served. Again, the 125% rule is triggered when an LEA decides to serve a campus that has a low income percent below 35%. Let's take a detailed look at an example in the form of a table. As shown in this table, this concentrates the allocations in the LEA's highest poverty campuses, which are campuses A, B, C, and D. School E, which has the highest poverty percentage after those campuses, receives the LEA's remaining funds. Campuses F and G were eligible, but since there were no funds remaining, the LEA was not able to serve them. There are some additional allocation flexibilities provided by ESSA that we will examine further. Skipping a campus and a related exception. Skipping is an exception to the requirements described with respect to allocating Title I funds to campuses in rank order of poverty. It permits an LEA to elect not to serve, in example, skip, an eligible school that has a higher percentage of students from low-income families if the school meets the comparability requirements in ESSA Section 1118C, and the school receives supplemental funds from state or local sources that it spends according to the requirements in ESSA sections 1114 or 1115, an example on programs that meet the intent and purposes of Title I Part A, and the supplemental funds a school spends from other sources equal or exceed the amount it would receive under Title I Part A. Before an LEA makes a decision to skip a campus, they must be aware of the statutory requirements associated with a program that meets the intent and purposes of Title I, Part A. A program meets the intent and purposes of Title I, Part A if the program either is implemented in a school in which the percentage of children from low-income families is at least 40%, is designed to promote school-wide reform and upgrade the entire educational operation of the school to support students in their academic achievement toward meeting the challenging state academic standards that all students are expected to meet, is designed to meet the educational needs of all students in the school, particularly the needs of students who are failing or at most at risk of failing to meet the challenging state academic standards, and uses the state's assessment system to review the effectiveness of the program. Or it is a program that serves only students who are failing or most at risk of failing to meet the challenging state academic standards, provides supplementary services designed to meet the special educational needs of participating students to support their achievement toward meeting the state's student academic achievement standards, and uses the state's assessment system to review the effectiveness of the program. It is also important to note that if an LEA skips a school, the LEA is still required to use Title I Part A funds to provide equitable services to eligible students who reside in the attendance area of the skipped school. An LEA must determine which school attendance areas would have received Title I Part A funds absent any skipping and/or not serving and the per pupil allocations. The LEA must then determine the amount of funds that would have been allocated for PNP children residing in eligible school attendance areas. In addition to the exception of skipping a campus, there is a related exception that applies if the amount of supplemental state or local funds a campus receives is less than what it would receive under Title I. ESSA permits an LEA to reduce the amount of Title I Part A funds allocated to a Title I Part A campus by the amount of supplemental funds from state or local sources that it spends on programs that meet the intent and purpose of Title I Part A. This concludes a section of this training that addressed the 3 steps for Title I Part A within LEA allocations, where we looked at Step 1, which is determining poverty counts, Step 2, which is ranking and identifying eligible campuses, and Step 3, which is allocating Title I Part A funds to eligible campuses. As mentioned earlier in the training, please note that the low-income percentages that were referenced and the options for serving campuses were for determining overall Title I Part A eligibility. An LEA must first determine if a campus meets overall Title I Part A eligibility before determining which program a campus will implement. If a campus does not meet overall Title I Part A eligibility, they cannot operate a Title I Part A program. Once it is determined that a campus meets Title I eligibility requirements, the campus will need to determine which Title I program the school will implement based on the eligibility criteria for each program. They can implement a school-wide program or a targeted assistance program. A school-wide program permits a school to use funds from Title I Part A and other federal programs to upgrade the entire education program in a Title I campus to improve the achievement of the lowest achieving students. Generally speaking, to be eligible for a school-wide program, the campus must have a low-income percentage of at least 40%. If the campus is eligible for Title I Part A but does not meet the 40% threshold, there are several options the campus has. It is possible to request an EdFlex school-wide program eligibility waiver in the submission of the ESSA Consolidated Federal Grant application. Additionally, If a campus falls below the 40% school-wide program eligibility low income required percentage, they can use the school-wide previous year provision and remain a school-wide program until the campus is either school-wide eligible on its own or is no longer Title I Part A eligible and cannot be served. Please note that the campus still needs to meet the Title I Part A eligibility criteria. The third option a campus can use to remain a school-wide campus if it does not meet the 40% threshold is the feeder pattern option, as described earlier in the training. A targeted assistance program provides services to eligible children identified as failing or being most at risk of failing to meet the state's challenging academic standards. Targeted assistance program campuses are either ineligible for a school-wide program or have chosen not to operate a school-wide program. A campus may be served as targeted assistance campus, provided the campus is Title I Part A eligible, which is at least 35% low income or equal to or greater than the LEA low income percentage. Before we conclude the training, I wanted to provide you with some resources that you might find helpful in administering Title I Part A programs in your LEA. The following resources are available to you on the TEA Title I Part A webpage. The Title I Part A Use of Funds one-pager provides the steps and requirements associated with the use of Title I Part A funds. The Program Guide provides an overview of the program requirements of the Title I Part A program. And we recently published a Title I Part A Frequently Asked Questions document that provides responses by topics to Title I Part A related questions we receive. The resources can all be accessed in the Resources section of the TEA Title I Part A webpage. This concludes the training. Thank you for joining us. I hope you were able to gain a better understanding of the factors determining the amount allocated to Title I Part A campuses, the steps used to determine Within-LEA allocations, and the exceptions associated with allocating Title I Part A funds to campuses. Please reach out if you have any questions or if you need additional information. You can contact me via division email address at essasupport@tea.texas.gov or via the division phone number at 512-463-9499. Thank you.
If you have questions regarding how to complete the SC5000 schedule, here is a list of grant negotiators by region. We also have a list of contacts for the expenditure reporting system. Thank you.